So there's a few things that we are going to be doing. We need to make Pacman get eaten. We also need to have a new level once we run out of pellets. And we need to start a new game once we run out of lives. All these things that we're going to need to do are going to require a setup. So the ghosts are going to have to go back into their home. Pacman has to go back into his position. The pellets need to all respawn, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to start creating a setup. So let's just look at every individual instance of this game and figure out how we can sort of reset it. So if we were going to our player controller, what would we really need to do? All we would need to do is set our last direction to left and set our current node back to our start node. So let's have a public game object, start node. So we're going to go into our awake function and we're just going to set start node to equal our movement controller, and actually we have to do this below our movement controller declaration dot current node. And then we're going to create a setup function that our game manager is going to call. So it has to be public setup, and on setup we're going to set our current node movement controller dot current node back to our start node. And then we are going to set our movement controller dot last moving direction equal to left. And we can remove that from awake. So everything in awake should just be like getting components and initializing things that we're going to be able to use for the rest of the game. So now at any time when we call our setup function from our game manager, it is going to reset our position. Actually, that's another thing. We need to keep track of our starting position. So public vector2 start position. And let's actually figure that out right here. So before we kind of estimated it, but now I would like to nail in the exact position that we want Pacman to start. So normally they would be set to 0, but when we started, the background was a little bit off center. So we're just going to move over a little bit. So it is negative 0.06, negative 0.65. This will be different for you. So let's set start position equal to new vector2. And I believe that was negative 0.065. Yes. Okay, and it doesn't like that. Oh, I think I have to put F afterwards. Yep. Okay, so then in setup, we're just going to hard set our transformed up position to our start position. We're not going to slowly move to it or anything. It's just going to snap into its place. Another thing that we're going to want to do is set moving to false. So we don't want Pacman to be moving by default because when you first turn on the game, there's going to be like a little song that plays before anything happens. And so right now our moving variable is going to be automatically set to true because it's just an update. But we're going to go to game manager and we're going to create a public bool game is running. And by default right now, we're going to set it to true, which actually we can just set that to true in awake. But it's not going to be true when the game first starts, and we're going to fix that later. So if we go to our player controller, we can just say if game is running, or sorry, game manager. Oh, we never accessed our game manager on our player. Okay, so let's declare the game manager. All right, so we're going to say if not game manager dot is running. So if game is running equals false, then just return and don't do any of this code. So we don't want to move our direction or anything like that if the game is not running. Now we're going to need to do a bit more with this later, but for now this should be fine because we are going to have other animations that we need to set to false, such as the death animation and stuff like that. Next, let's do the exact same thing in our enemy controller. So let's take a second to think about what we're going to need in our setup function. We are going to need to reset our ghost back to their home position. This will be different depending on each ghost. We will need to set their scatter node index back to 0. What else do the ghosts do? Set is frightened to false. They can't be frightened or in their frightened mode if the game has just started, which is important because you could eat a ghost. That ghost could go back to home and come out and eat you while the other ghosts are still frightened. So we want to immediately set is frightened to false here. Now what else do we have? We're going to have animation, so we're going to eventually have to set animation. But I think, ready to leave home by default is going to have to be false if they are blue or pink. Set ready to leave home to be false if they are blue or pink. We're also going to need to reset our ghost node state, but we're not going to want to make it a respawn state because remember, red respawns inside of the home, but they don't start out inside of the home. So we're going to need to create a start state. So public ghost node state enum start ghost node state. Okay. Then in awake, we are going to set start state equal to ghost node state. And actually what we can do is right here where we set our ghost node state, we can instead set our start ghost node state. So at this point in our awake function, we have not set our actual ghost node state. We have just set our start state. And then in setup, we will say ghost node state equals, was that what it's called? Ghost node state. Yes. Equals ghost node start. Start ghost node state. Okay. So then reset our ghost back to their home position. So we already created this starting node. So we can set current node movement controller dot current node equals starting node. Transform dot position equals starting node dot transform dot position. We actually do that here in awake. We no longer need to do that. Same with this movement controller. We're going to just do that every single time in setup. In awake, we just want to set our permanent things. So none of these things should ever change, including ready to leave home and left home before. We don't want to put that here because we're going to need to reuse it. So we're going to say if ghost type equals ghost type dot red. Ready to leave home equals true. Left home before equals true because red immediately leaves. Then we're going to take our scatter node index and we're going to set it to 0 here. Okay. So we're going to set is frightened to equal false. I believe that sums up all the things that the ghosts are going to need to do for now. The next thing we're going to want to do on setup is make sure that all the pellets are set to true again. So if we clear a level, we want to make sure that those pellets spawn. So right now in collected pellet, we're not doing anything with this node controller, but we're going to create a list up here that is going to have all of our node controllers. So we'll just type in public list node controller node controllers equals new list node controller. Okay. So now we actually need to get our node controller from got pellet from node controller. Not in collected pellet. We need to have them as soon as it starts. And at this point, we are going to have node controllers. And at this point, we're going to have node controllers dot add our node controller. Then we need to go to our node controller script and send this in. So we'll send the instance of the script into Game Manager. And now if we create a setup function, we can actually loop through all of these nodes. And then we're going to call node controllers I dot respawn pellet, which is not a function yet. So we're going to create it. Public void respawn pellet. And if is pellet node, then has pellet equals true. And pellet sprite dot enabled equals true. This is also where we're going to call Pacman dot get component player controller dot setup. And we can call red ghost dot get component enemy controller dot setup as well, but we're going to start to need this enemy controller a bit more later. So rather than calling get component every time, I'm just going to store a reference to them. So public enemy controller red ghost controller. And let's do that 4 times. And in awake, we're just going to say red ghost controller equals red ghost dot get component enemy controller. This way we have access to them without having to type in get component every time. Okay, so let's just call red ghost controller dot setup, pink ghost controller dot setup, blue ghost controller dot setup, and orange ghost controller dot setup. All right, so when we call setup in our game manager, the pellets will respond. And Pacman will set up, and the all the ghosts will go back to their setup positions. Now, something that's important is we're going to need to create 2 new variables: new game and cleared level. Okay, so in awake, new game is going to get set to true, and cleared level is going to set to false. So in this loop, we're going to say if cleared level or new game, that's when we're going to do this, because we're going to need to call setup when Pacman dies, but when Pacman dies, we don't want to respawn all of the pellets. So let's just add to these comments. Pellets will respawn when Pacman clears the level or starts a new game. So we haven't done this before, so I'm going to explain it a little bit. We haven't done this before, so I'm going to try and explain it a little bit. This setup function is going to be a coroutine, and what that means is you're going to be able to stop executing code for a certain amount of time, and then you will be able to start executing more code again. So almost like a pause in the code. To do this, we just type in IE numerator. That's what it's going to return. And then at the very start, just type in yield new return, wait for seconds, and then just like 3 for now. Sorry, it's yield return new. Now we're going to need to pause the code a few times for a few different situations. So if Pacman clears the level, and I'm going to type this in here. If Pacman clears a level, a background will appear covering the level, and the game will pause for like 0.1 seconds. So just basically like a flash. And once the flash is over and the background, basically a giant black border is going to cover the screen, and then it's going to flash away. And when it flashes away, everything has to be back to normal. So we're going to say if cleared level, which we haven't set anywhere yet, activate background, which we will eventually create later. And then yield return new, wait for seconds, 0.1. We need to set pellets collected on this life to be back to 0. We need to set ghost mode, or current ghost mode, to be back to ghost mode.chase. We need to set our current ghost mode to equal ghost mode.scatter, because it actually starts out in scatter mode. Game is running is going to be set to false. Then we're just going to delete this because I was only using it as an example. Now we're going to create a float wait timer equal to 1f. And if we cleared the level or new game, we want our wait timer to equal 4. And then finally, at the very bottom, we're going to set new game to equal false, cleared level to equal false. And then we are going to yield return new wait for seconds, wait timer. And then we're going to call start game, void start game. And that's when we're going to set game is running equal to true. All right, so let's go over this. There are 3 scenarios. The first one is Pacman dies. So that's going to be in a different function. A ghost is going to eat Pacman. Pacman's going to play a death animation. It's going to immediately call setup after a pause, which will happen in that function that we haven't done yet. And then it's not going to pause again. It's going to immediately set the game up and spawn you right back in. So it won't activate a background because we didn't clear the level or start a new game. It's not going to respawn the pellets. It's going to put Pacman back to its position, and same with the ghosts. So basically, Pacman dies. It's just putting everything back to where it was without respawning the pellets. The second example is if we cleared the level. So if we cleared the level, then everything stops. It pauses for a second, flashes a border over the screen, removes the border. Everything's back to where it was before. And it waits about 4 seconds before the level starts. The third example is basically the same as last one, and that's if we start a new game. So we haven't quite finished this yet. Right down here, we're going to say if new game. Then we are going to play the song. So we're going to have an audio source up here. Public audio source, start game audio. So if it's a new game, we're going to play start game audio. We're going to set our score back to 0. Our score text equal to score plus score dot toString. And it has to be score text dot text. And then we're going to have two more variables, public int lives and public int current level. And if we start a new game, lives will be set back to 3 and current level will be set to 1. Now I know it might be hard to sort of understand what's going on because I can't immediately show it to you, but there is quite a bit of setup in order to get this stuff to work. I'm going to be going over this once we actually start seeing it work in Unity 2. Alright, so let's go to our game manager and we are going to create a new component for our new audio source. We're not going to play on Awake, even though we're technically going to be. It's just better to be able to manipulate it to play the sound when you want, because we're also going to want to play the sound if we get a game over. So let's drag our game start into this audio clip. Then we'll minimize these and drag our audio source into start game audio. So let's try and set this up so that our setup function works when we start a new game. So new game is automatically set to true in Awake because we want it to be a new game. Game is running is set to true. So we're going to have to also do the same thing in our enemy controller, where if not game manager dot is running, return, so that the ghosts don't move. Now we want to delete game is running equals true, and we do not want our pink ghost to be ready to leave home, and we don't want our current ghost mode to be set. This one's fine. Pacman's fine. We don't want our score to be set, and current munch should be set to 0 in our setup. It doesn't really matter where. And siren.play wants to be called once we start the game. Next, in Awake, we're going to have to call setup. Now, because setup is a coroutine, you can't call it like this. You have to call it by typing in start, coroutine, setup. And this basically just lets Unity know that it's not going to run the code from top to bottom immediately. It has to take breaks in between. So now if we click start, what I believe is going to happen is we're going to automatically be able to move, but we won't be able to control our character. And it is playing the song, and then after, we're able to control our character. So this is really good. That's just because we didn't tell our movement controller that it couldn't do anything if the game wasn't running. So in our movement controller, we're just going to say if game manager dot game is running. If it's not running, then return. And now you should notice that our setup function in our game manager should be working. We click play. It plays our song. Now Pacman is in the wrong position. Right by default, so that's not good. That means our start position is off. We want the Y position to be -0.63. So I'm going to go adjust that in my code. Player controller. Okay, let's try and rerun this. Hopefully Pacman is exactly where I have them right now. They are. And as soon as the music's done, which was about 4 seconds, the game starts running. Now, we didn't tell our pink ghost to leave home, which we want to do right away. So let's go to our enemy controller. And under setup, we're going to say else if ghost type equals ghost type dot pink. Ready to leave home equals true. But they haven't left home because they still need to leave home. And now we should see pink immediately leave home. Okay, that is awesome. So we have 1 out of 3 scenarios completed.